Simple flower delivery leads to a deadly secret. When a florist hands white lilies to a detective with a chilling warning, the quiet streets of Boston are no longer safe. What did the flowers mean? And who left the message? You're about to enter a world of hidden motives and dangerous men. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The autumn rain fell in steady sheets across Boston's cobblestone streets, turning the gas lamps into hazy beacons of amber light through the evening mist. Detective William Hartford stood beneath the green awning of Pemberton's flower shop, watching the water cascade from the canvas edge in rhythmic streams. His tall frame was wrapped in a dark wool overcoat, droplets clinging to the brim of his fedora as he contemplated the peculiar note that had arrived at his office earlier that afternoon. The message had been brief, written in elegant script on cream-colored paper. Come to Pemberton's at 7:30. A matter of utmost urgency. No signature, no return address, only the faint scent of roses clinging to the envelope. William had built his reputation on logic and methodical investigation. At 32 years of age, he had solved some of Boston's most perplexing cases, earning the respect of the police department and the gratitude of numerous families. His strong jawline and penetrating blue eyes gave him an air of authority, though those who knew him well recognized the gentleness that lay beneath his professional demeanor. He believed in facts, in evidence, in the tangible threads that wove together to reveal truth. Yet here he stood, answering a summons from an unknown correspondent, drawn by curiosity and an instinct he couldn't quite name. The shop's door chimed softly as he pushed it open, and immediately the heavy scent of flowers enveloped him. Roses, lilies, chrysanthemums, and dozens of varieties he couldn't identify created a tapestry of color and fragrance that seemed almost overwhelming after the clean smell of rain. The interior was warm, lit by several oil lamps that cast dancing shadows across the wooden walls lined with vases and arrangements. Behind the counter stood a young woman, and William found himself momentarily arrested by her appearance. She possessed an ethereal beauty that seemed perfectly suited to her surroundings. Her chestnut hair was gathered in a loose arrangement at the nape of her neck, with a few rebellious strands framing a face of delicate features. Her eyes, a striking shade of green that reminded him of new spring leaves, met his with an intensity that suggested both intelligence and something deeper, something troubled. She wore a simple dress of dove gray with a white apron, her hands occupied with trimming the stems of white lilies. "Detective Hartford," she said, and it was not a question. Her voice carried a musical quality, though he detected a tremor of nervousness beneath its surface. "You have me at a disadvantage, miss," William replied, removing his hat and stepping further into the shop. Water dripped from his coat onto the worn wooden floor. "You know my name, yet I don't believe we've had the pleasure of an introduction." "Eleanor Pemberton," she answered, setting down her shears with deliberate care. "This is my father's shop, though he's been away on business in New York for the past fortnight. I'm the one who sent you the note, detective. I apologize for the cryptic nature of the message, but I wasn't certain you would come if I explained the situation in writing. It sounds rather impossible, you see." William moved closer to the counter, studying her face. She was perhaps 26 or 27, he estimated, with the refined bearing of someone educated and well-bred. Yet there was a practicality in the way she handled the flowers, a competence that suggested she was no stranger to work. "I'm here now, Miss Pemberton. Perhaps you might tell me what troubles you." Eleanor's hands moved to the white lilies before her, her fingers trailing along the pristine petals. 3 days ago, a man came into the shop. He was distinguished-looking, perhaps 60 years of age, with silver hair and expensive clothing. He purchased a dozen white lilies and requested that they be delivered to the Ashford Hotel, room 207, with a card that read only, "Remember what was promised." I thought it an odd message, but customers often have their own reasons for such things. She paused, her eyes distant as if seeing the memory play out before her. "The following day I read in the newspaper that a man had been found deceased in room 207 of the Ashford Hotel. His name was Edmund Blackwell, a wealthy industrialist. The article mentioned that white lilies had been found in his room." William felt the familiar stirring of professional interest. "You believe the man who purchased the flowers from you was connected to Mr. Blackwell's death?" "I don't know what to believe, detective," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "But this morning another man came into the shop. He was younger, perhaps 40, with dark eyes that seemed to look through rather than at me. He asked if I remembered who had purchased white lilies 3 days prior. When I hesitated, when I said I served many customers and couldn't recall every transaction, he smiled in a way that chilled me to my core. She reached beneath the counter and withdrew a small card, sliding it across the polished wood toward William. He picked it up, noting the quality of the paper, the same cream color as the note he'd received. Written in the same elegant hand were words that made his jaw tighten. "They're looking for you, and they're closer than you think." "He left that with me," Eleanor continued, her composure wavering slightly. "He said that if I spoke to anyone about the gentleman who purchased the lilies, there would be consequences. But I couldn't remain silent, Detective. Edmund Blackwell's death was ruled natural causes, a failure of the heart. But those flowers, that message, and now this threat. Something is terribly wrong, and I fear I may have become entangled in something dangerous simply by doing my work." William studied the card, his mind already cataloging questions and possibilities. "Did the first man, the one who purchased the lilies, give you his name?" "No, he paid in cash and provided no identification. But I would recognize him if I saw him again. There was something memorable about his bearing, a certain authority in the way he carried himself." "And the second man, the one who threatened you?" "Also anonymous, though his accent suggested he wasn't born in Boston." There was a roughness to his speech beneath the formal words, as if he was playing a part. William folded the card and placed it in his coat pocket. The rain continued its percussion against the shop windows, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolled 8 times. "Miss Pemberton, I must ask you a difficult question. Is there any reason someone might wish to implicate you in Mr. Blackwell's death? Any connection between you or your family and the deceased?" Eleanor shook her head emphatically. "None whatsoever. I had never heard his name before reading it in the newspaper. My father runs an honest business, Detective. We provide flowers for weddings, funerals, celebrations. We don't involve ourselves in the affairs of industrialists and whatever schemes they might concoct." There was something in her earnestness that William found compelling. He had interviewed countless individuals over the years, developing an instinct for deception, and he sensed none in Eleanor Pemberton. What he did sense was genuine fear and a fierce determination not to be cowed by threats. It was an admirable combination. "I'll need you to describe both men in as much detail as you can recall," William said, withdrawing a small notebook from his inner pocket. "Everything from their height and build to any distinguishing features, the cut of their clothes, the sound of their voices. The smallest detail might prove significant." For the next 20 minutes, Eleanor provided descriptions with an artist's eye for detail. The first man had stood approximately 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders that suggested he maintained physical fitness despite his age. His silver hair had been meticulously groomed, his mustache precisely trimmed. He had worn a dark suit of exceptional quality, with a gold watch chain visible across his vest. His hands had been smooth, uncalloused, the hands of someone unaccustomed to manual labor. His voice had been cultured, with the neutral accent of someone well-educated and well-traveled. The second man had been shorter, perhaps 5 feet and 8 inches, with a more compact build. His hair had been dark and slicked back with pomade, his face clean-shaven. His eyes had been his most memorable feature, dark brown and intensely focused. He had worn a brown suit that, while respectable, lacked the fine tailoring of the first man's attire. His accent, as Eleanor had noted, carried hints of somewhere else, perhaps the rougher neighborhoods of New York or Philadelphia, though he attempted to mask it with careful diction. William recorded every detail, his pencil moving quickly across the pages of his notebook. As Eleanor spoke, he found himself increasingly aware of her presence, the way her hands moved expressively as she described the men, the way her eyes reflected the lamplight, the subtle strength in her bearing despite her obvious fear. It was unprofessional to notice such things, he reminded himself, yet he was only human, and Eleanor Pemberton was undeniably captivating. "You've been very thorough," William said as he closed his notebook. "I'll make inquiries regarding Mr. Blackwell's death. If there's any suggestion of foul play, the authorities will need to revisit the circumstances. In the meantime, I must insist that you take precautions for your safety." Eleanor's expression showed both relief and apprehension. "What sort of precautions, Detective? Does anyone else work in the shop with you while your father is away?" "My cousin Margaret assists me during the busier hours." but she leaves each day at 4 o'clock. In the evenings, I'm alone." William frowned, his concern deepening. "That's not acceptable given the current situation. Is there someone who might stay with you? A family member or friend?" "I have an aunt who lives 3 streets over. I could send her a message." "Please do so tonight, and I'll arrange for a patrolman to make regular passes by the shop. Don't open the door after dark unless you're certain of who's calling. If either of those men returns, send word to me immediately at this address." He tore a page from his notebook and wrote quickly, "This is both my office and my residence. I live above my workspace, so someone is always available to receive messages." Eleanor took the paper, her fingers briefly brushing against his as she did so. The contact was fleeting, entirely innocent, yet William felt an unexpected warmth spread through him at the touch. Their eyes met for a moment, and he saw something in her gaze that mirrored his own sudden awareness, a recognition of something unspoken passing between them. "Thank you, Detective Hartford," Eleanor said softly. "I cannot express how relieved I am to have shared this burden. I've felt quite alone these past days, wondering if I was overreacting to what might be coincidence. Trust your instincts, Miss Pemberton. In my experience, when something feels wrong, there's usually good reason for that feeling." He replaced his hat, preparing to venture back into the rain. "I'll return tomorrow with whatever information I've uncovered. In the meantime, please, be careful." As William stepped out into the wet evening, pulling his coat tighter against the chill, his mind was already working through the puzzle presented to him. Edmund Blackwell's death ruled natural, but accompanied by mysterious white lilies and a cryptic message. A flower shop proprietor's daughter caught in the middle, threatened for reasons she couldn't understand. And somewhere in the shadows, men who clearly had much to hide and resources enough to pursue their secrets. The walk back to his office took him through streets slick with rain, past shops closing for the night and restaurants beginning to fill with dinner patrons. Boston in 1897 was a city of contrasts, old money and new ambition, propriety and corruption existing side by side. William had seen enough in his career to know that beneath the civilized veneer of gaslights and genteel society, darker currents ran deep. His office occupied the second floor of a brick building near the harbor, the salt air and fog a constant presence. As he climbed the narrow stairs, he was already planning his next steps. The Ashford Hotel would be his first destination tomorrow morning, followed by inquiries at the police station regarding Mr. Blackwell's death. He also needed to learn more about the deceased industrialist himself. A man of wealth and influence didn't die without leaving ripples, and those ripples might lead him toward answers. But as William lit the lamp in his office and began reviewing his notes, it wasn't only the mystery that occupied his thoughts. Eleanor Pemberton's face kept appearing in his mind, her green eyes filled with determination and fear, her graceful hands moving among the flowers. There was something about her that had reached past his professional detachment, touched something he thought he'd long since disciplined into submission. He reminded himself sternly that she was a client, that his duty was to protect her and uncover the truth, nothing more. Yet even as he made this resolution, he knew that Eleanor Pemberton had already begun to occupy a space in his thoughts that had nothing to do with detective work and everything to do with the man beneath the badge. Outside, the rain continued its endless fall, washing the streets clean while secrets festered in the darkness, waiting to be brought into the light. The morning arrived with pale sunlight breaking through the dissipating clouds, casting long shadows across Boston's awakening streets. William Hartford had risen before dawn, his sleep restless and interrupted by thoughts of white lilies and mysterious threats. He dressed carefully in a charcoal suit, ensuring his appearance reflected the professionalism required when making inquiries at establishments like the Ashford Hotel. The hotel stood on Tremont Street, a 5-story edifice of red brick and white trim that catered to Boston's wealthier visitors and residents seeking temporary accommodation. Its facade spoke of understated elegance, with brass fixtures polished to a gleam and doormen in immaculate uniforms greeting guests with practiced courtesy. William approached the front desk, where a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a meticulously groomed mustache presided over the hotel's daily operations. "Good morning. I'm Detective William Hartford, and I'm making inquiries regarding a guest who stayed here recently, a Mr. Edmund Blackwell." The clerk's expression shifted subtly, a flicker of discomfort crossing his features before professional neutrality reasserted itself. "Mr. Blackwell, yes. A terrible tragedy. The gentleman passed away in his room 5 days ago. The authorities investigated and determined it to be natural causes. I understand that, William said, keeping his tone conversational rather than confrontational. However, new information has come to light that warrants a closer examination. I'd like to speak with whoever discovered Mr. Blackwell, and if possible, I'd like to see room 207. The clerk hesitated, his fingers drumming nervously on the polished counter. The room has since been cleaned and prepared for new guests. As for who discovered Mr. Blackwell, that would be Sarah Mitchell, one of our housekeeping staff. She came to turn down the bed for the evening and found him seated in the chair by the window, already deceased. Is Miss Mitchell working today? She is, though I'm not certain the management would approve of you questioning our staff without proper authorization from the police department. William leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a more confidential tone. I'm not here to cause difficulties for your establishment. Quite the contrary, I'm attempting to ensure that nothing untoward occurred under your roof that might reflect poorly on the Ashfords' reputation. Surely you'd prefer any irregularities be addressed quietly, rather than becoming fodder for newspaper speculation. The logic, combined with the implicit threat of unwanted publicity, had its desired effect. The clerk nodded slowly. I'll send for Sarah. You may speak with her in the staff sitting room. As for the room itself, we do have it vacant at present. I suppose a brief viewing would be acceptable, provided you're discreet. 10 minutes later, William found himself in a modestly furnished room where staff took their breaks, sitting across from a young woman whose hands twisted nervously in her lap. Sarah Mitchell appeared to be in her early 20s, with auburn hair tucked beneath a white cap and freckles scattered across her nose. Her eyes, red-rimmed and anxious, spoke of sleepless nights since her discovery. Miss Mitchell, I appreciate you speaking with me, William began gently. I know this must have been a distressing experience. Can you tell me exactly what you observed when you entered Mr. Blackwell's room that evening? Sarah's voice trembled as she spoke. I knocked twice, as we always do, and when there was no answer, I used my key. The lamps were lit, which I thought strange since it was only 7:30, and still some daylight coming through the windows. Mr. Blackwell was sitting in the wingback chair near the window, facing toward the door as if he'd been waiting for someone. At first, I thought he was simply resting, but then I noticed how still he was, how his eyes were open, but seeing nothing. She paused, drawing a shaky breath. There were flowers on the table beside him, white lilies in a crystal vase. They smelled so strong, Detective, almost overwhelming, and there was a card propped against the vase. I didn't read it. I ran to fetch the manager immediately. You mentioned the lamps were lit. Was there any sign that Mr. Blackwell had been entertaining a visitor? Extra glasses, dishes, anything of that nature? Sarah shook her head. The room was quite tidy. There was a teacup on the table, half empty, and that was all. The bed hadn't been disturbed. His personal effects were neatly arranged on the dresser. The teacup, William said, his interest sharpening. Do you remember if it was still warm? I didn't touch it, sir. The manager instructed me not to disturb anything until the police arrived. And when the police came, what happened to Mr. Blackwell's belongings? The flowers, the card, his personal items. The body was removed, and his effects were packed up to be sent to his family. The flowers, I believe they were simply discarded. They were already beginning to wilt. William felt a surge of frustration. Evidence, if there had been any, had been lost to efficiency and the assumption of natural death. Miss Mitchell, did you notice anything else unusual? Anyone lurking in the hallway? Any sounds from the room before you entered? Anything at all that struck you as out of place? Sarah considered this carefully, her brow furrowing with concentration. There was one thing, though I'm not certain it means anything. When I was walking down the hall toward Mr. Blackwell's room, I passed a gentleman coming from that direction. He was well dressed, older, with silver hair. He nodded politely and continued on his way. I thought perhaps he'd been visiting another guest, but now I wonder if he'd come from room 207. William's pulse quickened. The description matched the man who had purchased the lilies from Eleanor. Can you remember anything else about this gentleman? His height, his bearing, any distinguishing features? He was tall, taller than most men, and he carried himself like someone accustomed to authority. His clothes were expensive, I could tell that much, and he had a gold watch chain across his vest. I noticed it because it caught the light from the hall lamps. What time was this? Perhaps 10 minutes before I discovered Mr. Blackwell. I'd been attending to other rooms on that floor. William thanked Sarah for her information, and requested that she contact him immediately if she remembered anything else or if anyone questioned her about that evening. The young woman nodded earnestly, clearly relieved to have unburdened herself to someone who took her observations seriously. The clerk, true to his word, escorted William to room 207. It was a comfortable accommodation, neither the finest nor the humblest the hotel offered. The wallpaper was a subdued pattern of cream and gold, the furniture solid and well-maintained. William stood in the center of the room, trying to envision the scene as Sarah had described it. Edmund Blackwell, seated in the chair by the window, white lilies beside him, a teacup half consumed, his eyes open in death. Had he been waiting for someone? Had that someone been the silver-haired gentleman who purchased the flowers? And if Blackwell's death was indeed murder masquerading as natural causes, how had it been accomplished? William examined the chair, the table, the window that looked out over the street below. He opened the drawers of the dresser, finding them empty and recently lined with fresh paper. The room had been thoroughly cleaned, any traces of its previous occupant methodically erased. As he prepared to leave, something caught his eye. Beside the baseboard near the window, partially hidden by the heavy curtain, lay a small scrap of paper. William knelt to retrieve it, handling it carefully by its edges. It appeared to be a corner torn from a larger document, no more than an inch square. On it, written in faded ink, were 3 partial letters. Then. It might mean nothing, a scrap left by any number of previous guests or staff. Yet William's instincts told him to preserve it. He folded it into his handkerchief and placed it securely in his pocket. Leaving the Ashford Hotel, William made his way to the police station, where he was fortunate enough to encounter Detective Sergeant Peter Donnelly, a colleague with whom he'd worked on several cases. Donnelly was a stocky man in his 40s with graying hair and a perpetually weary expression born of too many years witnessing human nature at its worst. "Hartford," Donnelly greeted him with a nod. "What brings you here this morning? Found another puzzle that's caught your interest?" "The Edmund Blackwell case. I understand it was ruled natural causes, but I've come across information that suggests the matter warrants a second look." Donnelly's expression grew guarded. "What sort of information?" William explained about Eleanor's encounter with the flower purchaser and the subsequent threat, though he kept her identity vague for the moment, referring to her only as a witness who had come forward. He described Sarah Mitchell's account of the silver-haired man in the hallway and the peculiar circumstances of Blackwell's death. Donnelly listened quietly, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. When William finished, the sergeant sighed heavily. "I was the one who responded to the hotel that night. The gentleman was seated as you described, deceased for no more than an hour according to the physician who examined him. His heart had simply stopped, or so it appeared. There were no marks of violence, no signs of struggle, nothing to suggest foul play. What about the teacup? It contained tea, nothing more. We had no reason to test it for anything else, given the apparent circumstances. And the card with the flowers? It read, 'Remember what was promised.' We assumed it was a personal matter, perhaps a reminder from a business associate or friend. Blackwell was a wealthy man, involved in numerous ventures. Such cryptic messages aren't uncommon among that class." William leaned against the wall, his mind working through the implications. What if the tea contained something that caused his heart to fail? Something that wouldn't be immediately apparent, that might mimic natural death? Donnelly's eyes narrowed. "That's a serious accusation, Hartford. Do you have any evidence beyond coincidental flower purchases and vague threats?" "Not yet," William admitted. "But consider the pattern. A man purchases flowers with a cryptic message and delivers them to Blackwell shortly before his death. The witness who sold those flowers is subsequently threatened when she's questioned about the transaction. Someone very badly wants to ensure that particular thread isn't pulled. Who was this witness? I'll need to speak with her officially." William hesitated, his protective instincts regarding Eleanor warring with his professional obligation to pursue justice. "I'll bring her to the station tomorrow, once I've ensured adequate protection is in place." "The threats against her were explicit, Donnelly. Whoever we're dealing with isn't making idle warnings." The sergeant nodded slowly. "I'll review the file again, see if there's anything we might have overlooked. But Hartford, be careful with this. If Edmund Blackwell was murdered, and if someone with significant resources went to such lengths to make it appear natural, you're walking into dangerous territory. I'm aware of the risks, but I can't ignore what's been brought to my attention." As William left the police station, the afternoon sun was beginning its descent. painting the buildings in shades of amber and gold. He checked his pocket watch, noting it was nearly 3 o'clock. His inquiries had consumed most of the day, but he had one more essential visit to make. Pemberton's flower shop appeared unchanged from the previous evening, though in daylight its cheerful exterior seemed almost incongruous with the dark matters it had become entangled in. William entered to find Eleanor arranging a bouquet of autumn flowers, her hands moving with practiced grace among the chrysanthemums and asters. She looked up at his entrance, and her face brightened in a way that made William's heart perform an unexpected maneuver in his chest. "Detective Hartford, I hoped you might return today. I've been quite anxious to know if you've learned anything." "I have, though I'm not certain how much clarity it provides," William replied, moving to the counter. He recounted his conversations at the hotel and with Donnelly, watching as Eleanor's expression shifted from interest to concern to something approaching fear. "Then you believe Mr. Blackwell was murdered," she said quietly, "and the man who purchased the lilies was his killer." "I believe it's a strong possibility, which means the threat to you is very real, Miss Pemberton. These aren't men playing games. They've killed once, if my theory is correct, and they've demonstrated a willingness to intimidate witnesses." Eleanor's hands stilled on the flowers, her face pale but resolute. "What would you have me do, Detective? Close the shop? Abandon my father's business because of threats from shadows?" "I would have you prioritize your safety above commerce," William said, his voice sharper than he'd intended. He softened his tone. "Forgive me, I don't mean to sound harsh, but I've seen what happens when people underestimate dangerous men, and I find myself particularly concerned for your welfare." Their eyes met, and in that moment something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the connection that had formed despite the brevity of their acquaintance. Eleanor was the first to look away, color rising in her cheeks. "My aunt has agreed to stay with me," she said, her voice not quite steady, "and I've been careful about whom I admit to the shop. But I won't be driven from my livelihood by fear, Detective. My father entrusted this business to me in his absence, and I won't betray that trust." William found himself simultaneously frustrated by her stubbornness and admiring of her courage. "Then at least allow me to provide additional protection. I'll arrange for more frequent police patrols, and I'll make a point of checking on you each day myself." "That's very kind of you," Eleanor said, meeting his gaze once more. "Though I suspect your time would be better spent pursuing these mysterious men rather than watching over a flower shop. The two aren't mutually exclusive. And Miss Pemberton, I must ask you to accompany me to the police station tomorrow. Detective Sergeant Donnelly will need your formal statement regarding the flower purchase and the subsequent threat." Eleanor nodded, though apprehension flickered across her face. "Of course. Whatever helps with the investigation." As if summoned by their discussion of danger, the shop door opened with its customary chime. Both William and Eleanor turned toward the entrance, and William's hand instinctively moved toward the revolver concealed beneath his coat. The man who entered was neither of the individuals Eleanor had described from her previous encounters. This was someone new, younger than the silver-haired purchaser, but older than the man who had threatened her. He appeared to be in his mid-30s with dark blonde hair and keen gray eyes that took in the shop's interior with calculating precision. He wore a navy suit of good quality and carried himself with quiet confidence. "Good afternoon," the newcomer said, his voice pleasant and cultured. "I'm looking for Miss Eleanor Pemberton. I was told I might find her here." "I'm Eleanor Pemberton," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the tension William could see in her posture. "How may I help you, sir?" The man smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "My name is Jonathan Ashford. I'm the owner of the Ashford Hotel, and I understand you may have information relevant to a recent unfortunate incident at my establishment, the death of Mr. Edmund Blackwell." The atmosphere in the flower shop shifted palpably with Jonathan Ashford's arrival, the air seeming to thicken with unspoken tension. William stepped forward, positioning himself slightly between Eleanor and the newcomer, his detective's instincts fully alert. "I'm Detective William Hartford," he said, his tone professional but carrying an edge of warning. "Miss Pemberton is under my protection while I investigate matters related to Mr. Blackwell's death. Perhaps you might explain how you learned of her involvement and what precisely brings you here, Mr. Ashford." Jonathan's gray eyes shifted to William, assessment clear in his gaze. "Detective Hartford, I've heard of you, actually. Your reputation for solving difficult cases precedes you. As for how I learned of Miss Pemberton's connection to this matter, I have sources throughout my hotel." When my desk clerk mentioned your visit this morning and your inquiries about the flowers found in Mr. Blackwell's room, I made it my business to discover their origin." "That was remarkably efficient," William observed, not entirely pleased by how quickly information had traveled. "I protect my interests, Detective. The Ashford Hotel has maintained an impeccable reputation for 30 years. When a guest dies under my roof, regardless of the apparent cause, I ensure I understand every detail surrounding the incident." Jonathan turned his attention back to Eleanor, his expression softening slightly. "Miss Pemberton, I mean you no harm. Quite the opposite, in fact. I'm here because I believe we may have a common interest in uncovering the truth about Edmund Blackwell's death." Eleanor's hands gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white with tension. "Why would you doubt the official conclusion that his death was natural?" "Because Edmund Blackwell was a business associate of mine," Jonathan replied, moving slowly toward the counter as one might approach a frightened animal. "We were involved in a significant investment venture together, one that stood to benefit both of us considerably. 3 days before his death, Edmund sent me a message saying he had discovered something troubling about our partners in the venture, something that made him question whether we should proceed. He requested a meeting, which was scheduled for the evening of his death." William's attention sharpened. "You were supposed to meet with him that night?" "I was. At 8 o'clock in his room at the hotel. When I arrived, I found the hallway cordoned off and police already present. I was informed that Edmund had died, apparently of heart failure. The authorities seemed satisfied with that explanation, so I had no grounds to challenge it. But Edmund was in excellent health, Detective. He was vigorous, active, and only 60 years of age. For his heart to simply stop seemed improbable. Yet you said nothing to the police at the time," William noted. Jonathan's jaw tightened. "I had no evidence of foul play, only suspicions, and the unfortunate timing. Moreover, the business venture I mentioned involves parties who prefer discretion. Drawing attention to Edmund's death by questioning the official finding might have exposed matters that were meant to remain private. I'm not proud of my silence, but I had reasons for it." Eleanor had been listening intently, her fear gradually giving way to curiosity. "Who were these other partners in your venture? The ones Mr. Blackwell had concerns about?" "That," Jonathan said carefully, "is where matters become delicate. The primary investor was a man named Victor Hendricks, a financier from New York with connections throughout the eastern seaboard. On the surface, he appeared to be exactly what he claimed, a wealthy gentleman seeking profitable opportunities. But Edmund had begun to suspect that Hendricks's money came from less legitimate sources, that we were being used to launder funds obtained through criminal enterprise. William felt several pieces of the puzzle beginning to align, and if Blackwell had shared these suspicions with the authorities, or if he had withdrawn from the venture and exposed Hendricks, it would have been catastrophic for your partner." "Precisely. Which is why, when I learned of the flowers and the cryptic message, I became convinced that Edmund's death was no accident. Someone silenced him before he could reveal what he'd discovered." "The man who purchased the lilies," Eleanor said, her voice trembling slightly. "The silver-haired gentleman. Could he have been this Victor Hendricks?" Jonathan shook his head. "Hendricks is younger, perhaps 45, with dark hair, but he certainly has resources to employ others to do his bidding. The description Miss Pemberton provides sounds like it might be Maxwell Sterling, Hendricks's personal attorney and fixer. Sterling has a reputation for handling his employer's more delicate problems." William withdrew his notebook, quickly recording these names and details. "Where can I find Victor Hendricks and Maxwell Sterling?" "Hendricks maintains an office on State Street, though he's often traveling between Boston and New York. Sterling is usually wherever Hendricks requires him to be. But, Detective, I must caution you. These are dangerous men with significant influence. If they killed Edmund to protect their secrets, they won't hesitate to eliminate anyone else who threatens to expose them." "Which is precisely why Miss Pemberton has been threatened," William said grimly. "She's a witness who can connect Sterling to Blackwell through the flowers. They want to ensure her silence, either through intimidation or, if necessary, more permanent means." Eleanor's face had gone pale, but her voice remained steady. "Then what do we do? If these men are as powerful as you suggest, how can we possibly bring them to justice?" Jonathan leaned against the counter, his expression troubled. "We need evidence, something concrete that links Hendricks and Sterling to Edmund's death. Without that, they're simply successful businessmen, and any accusations against them will be dismissed as unfounded speculation." William's mind was racing through possibilities. The teacup, If Blackwell was poisoned, there might still be traces in his body. We'd need to petition for an exhumation and proper autopsy. That will take time, Jonathan pointed out. Legal proceedings, family consent, medical examinations. Meanwhile, Miss Pemberton remains at risk. Then we need to draw them out, William said, an idea beginning to form. Make them believe Miss Pemberton knows more than she does, that she has evidence linking them to the murder. Force them to act, but on our terms, in a situation we control. Eleanor's eyes widened. You want to use me as bait? Absolutely not, William said immediately, his protective instincts flaring. I won't put you in harm's way. But it makes sense, Eleanor argued, her natural courage overriding her fear. If they believe I'm a threat, they'll come for me regardless. At least if we plan for it, if we're ready, we might catch them in the act of attempting to silence me. That would be evidence, wouldn't it? It's too dangerous, William insisted, moving closer to Eleanor. These men have already killed once. I won't gamble with your life. Jonathan watched their exchange with interest, his gaze moving between them with obvious understanding. The lady makes a valid point, Detective. And if we proceed carefully, with adequate protection in place, it might be our best opportunity to obtain the proof we need. William turned to Jonathan, frustration evident in his expression. You're suggesting we deliberately provoke killers and hope we can protect her when they strike? The variables are too numerous, the risks too high. Then what's your alternative? Jonathan challenged. Wait for the exhumation that may or may not provide evidence. Meanwhile, Hendricks and Sterling grow more nervous, more desperate. They might flee the city, or they might decide that Miss Pemberton's continued existence is an unacceptable risk and act preemptively. Eleanor reached across the counter, her hand touching William's arm gently. The contact sent a jolt through him, and he met her eyes, seeing determination mixed with something else, something that made his heart ache with conflicting emotions. Detective Hartford, she said softly, I understand your concerns, and I'm grateful for them. But Mr. Ashford is right. I'm already in danger. If there's a way to end this threat while bringing these men to justice, shouldn't we take it? William wanted to argue, wanted to insist on another way, but he recognized the truth in her words. His feelings for Eleanor, which had developed with surprising speed and intensity, were clouding his professional judgment. He needed to separate his personal concerns from what the situation actually required. If we do this, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion, we do it properly. Full police involvement, multiple officers stationed around the shop, every precaution taken. And at the first sign that the situation is spiraling beyond our control, we extract you immediately. Agreed, Eleanor said, relief evident in her expression. Jonathan nodded his approval. I can provide additional assistance. I have men in my employ who are discreet and capable. They can supplement the police presence without drawing attention. Over the next hour, the three of them planned their trap with meticulous care. William would contact Detective Sergeant Donnelly and arrange for plainclothes officers to be positioned around the flower shop and in the building across the street. Jonathan would station 2 of his security men in the back room of the shop itself, ready to intervene if needed. Eleanor would send a message to Maxwell Sterling at the address Jonathan provided, suggesting that she had documents related to the flower purchase that she wished to discuss, implying knowledge she didn't actually possess. The message needs to be carefully worded, William instructed as Eleanor prepared to write. Suggestive enough to alarm them, but not so explicit that they suspect a trap. Eleanor took up a pen, her hand steady despite the gravity of what they were planning. After several attempts and revisions suggested by both men, they settled on the following text. Mr. Sterling, I believe we should speak regarding the transaction that occurred at my shop 5 days ago. I have retained certain documentation that may be of interest to you and your associates. I will be at Pemberton's flower shop tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock. Come alone, and perhaps we can reach an understanding. E. Pemberton. That should do it, Jonathan said, reading over the message. It's vague enough to be interpreted multiple ways, but the implication of documentation will concern them greatly. William studied the note, his unease growing even as he acknowledged its necessity. Once we send this, there's no going back. They'll either respond with violence or they'll suspect a trap and disappear entirely. They'll respond, Jonathan said with certainty. Hendricks didn't build his empire by running from threats. He eliminates them. And Sterling is his instrument of elimination. As evening approached, Jonathan departed to make his arrangements. promising to return the following day, well before 7 o'clock. William remained with Eleanor as she closed the shop, his presence both professional and personal. They worked in comfortable silence, Eleanor tidying her workspace while William checked the locks on windows and doors, familiarizing himself with the shop's layout for the coming confrontation. "You should go home and rest," Eleanor said finally, as darkness settled over the streets outside. "My aunt will arrive within the hour, and you'll need your strength for tomorrow." "I'll leave once she's here," William replied, unwilling to leave Eleanor alone even for a short time. He paused, then added, "Miss Pemberton, I want you to know that if anything were to happen to you because of this plan, I would never forgive myself." Eleanor set down the vase she'd been moving and turned to face him fully. The lamplight cast her features in soft illumination, and William found himself memorizing every detail of her face, as if by doing so he could somehow keep her safe through sheer force of will. "Detective Hartford," she said, moving closer to him. "William, if I may be so bold as to use your given name, I'm not a fool. I understand the danger we're inviting, but I also understand that some things are worth the risk. Justice for Mr. Blackwell, certainly, but also the chance to live without fear, without constantly looking over my shoulder wondering when these men might decide I'm too much of a liability. There are other ways," William said, though even he heard the lack of conviction in his voice. "You could leave Boston, go somewhere they couldn't find you, and spend my life running, abandoning my father's business, my home, everything I know. That's not living, William. That's merely existing." She reached up, her hand touching his cheek in a gesture of startling intimacy. "Besides, I find I have reasons to want to stay in Boston, reasons that have developed quite recently." William's breath caught. The implications of her words, of her touch, were unmistakable. His own hand came up to cover hers, holding it gently against his face. "Eleanor, I shouldn't. You're under my protection. It would be inappropriate for me to—" "To what?" she interrupted softly. "To acknowledge that something has formed between us, to admit that in the midst of this danger and uncertainty, we've found something rare and precious." Her eyes searched his face. "Or is it that you don't feel as I do? If that's the case, please tell me now, and I'll speak of it no more." "You must know that's not the case," William said, his voice rough with emotion. "From the moment you looked at me across this counter, from the first words you spoke, I've been drawn to you in a way I can't fully explain. You're brave and intelligent and beautiful, and the thought of anything happening to you tomorrow tears at me in ways that have nothing to do with professional duty." Eleanor smiled, and it transformed her face from merely pretty to radiant. "Then we have an understanding, and all the more reason to ensure that tomorrow's plan succeeds, so that we might explore what this feeling between us could become." The moment was interrupted by a knock at the door. Eleanor's aunt had arrived, a stern-looking woman in her 50s who eyed William with obvious suspicion until Eleanor explained his role in protecting her. William took his leave reluctantly, but not before securing Eleanor's promise that she would remain inside with doors and windows locked until morning. As he walked through the dark streets back to his office, William's mind churned with preparations for the following evening, and with thoughts of Eleanor. He had dedicated his life to justice, to protecting the innocent and exposing the guilty. But never before had a case become so deeply personal. Never before had he felt his heart so thoroughly engaged alongside his mind. Tomorrow would bring danger, confrontation, and perhaps violence. But it would also bring resolution, one way or another. And if fortune favored them, if their plan succeeded and Eleanor emerged unharmed, then perhaps the future held something beyond professional satisfaction. Perhaps it held the beginning of something he'd long ago stopped believing possible. A life shared with someone who understood both his dedication to justice and the man beneath the detective's badge. The night passed slowly, minutes stretching into hours as William reviewed every detail of their plan, searching for weaknesses and contingencies. By dawn, he had refined their strategy and sent messages to Donnelly outlining what would be required. The sergeant, though expressing reservations similar to William's own, agreed to provide the requested support. The day of reckoning arrived with deceptive normalcy, autumn sunlight streaming through Boston's streets as citizens went about their daily business, unaware of the drama that would unfold before nightfall. William spent the morning coordinating with Detective Sergeant Donnelly, positioning plainclothes officers at strategic locations around Pemberton's flower shop. Each man understood his role, Observe, wait, and intervene only when clear evidence of criminal intent had been established. Jonathan Ashford arrived at noon, bringing with him two capable-looking men who carried themselves with the bearing of former soldiers. Thomas and Edward, he introduced them. Both served in the cavalry and have been in my employ for 5 years. They're trustworthy and experienced in difficult situations. William assessed them with a practiced eye, noting their calm demeanor and alert gazes. You'll position yourselves in the back room, out of sight but within earshot. If Miss Pemberton signals distress, or if violence appears imminent, you come through that door immediately, not before, understand? We need them to incriminate themselves before we act. Both men nodded their understanding, and Jonathan led them through the shop to familiarize them with the layout. Eleanor watched these preparations with remarkable composure, though William could see the tension in the set of her shoulders, the way her hands moved restlessly among the flowers she was arranging to maintain the shop's normal appearance. As the afternoon progressed, William found himself increasingly torn between his professional focus and his desire to spirit Eleanor away from the danger they'd deliberately invited. She caught him watching her for perhaps the dozenth time and crossed to where he stood near the window, checking sight lines and approach angles. "William," she said softly, using his given name with the familiarity they'd established the previous evening. "You're going to exhaust yourself with worry before anything even happens. I'm quite all right, truly." "I've placed you in harm's way," he replied, his voice low so the others wouldn't overhear. "Every instinct I possess tells me this is wrong, that I should be removing you from danger rather than using you to draw it closer." Eleanor's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his in a gesture that was both comforting and electrifying. "You're not using me, William. I chose this course, remember? And I chose it not just for justice or safety, but because I trust you completely. I know you won't let anything happen to me." Her faith in him was both humbling and terrifying. William raised her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Propriety be damned. When this is over," he said, holding her gaze, "when you're safe and these men are in custody, I would very much like to call on you properly, to court you as you deserve, with flowers and walks in the park and all the ordinary pleasures that have nothing to do with criminals and danger." Eleanor's smile was radiant despite the circumstances. "I would like that very much indeed. Though I must say, Detective Hartford, your method of courtship thus far has been remarkably memorable, even if unconventional." Their moment was interrupted by Jonathan's return from the back room. If he noticed their clasped hands or the intimacy of their posture, he gave no indication. "Everything is arranged. Thomas and Edward are in position. What time did you send the message to Sterling?" "Yesterday evening," Eleanor replied, reluctantly releasing William's hand. "It should have reached him by this morning. If he intends to respond, I expect he'll arrive near the appointed hour of 7 o'clock. Or he might arrive earlier to observe the shop and ensure it's not a trap," William pointed out. "Which is why we've had officers in place since noon, dressed as ordinary citizens going about their business. If Sterling or anyone associated with him has been surveilling the shop, they'll have seen nothing to alarm them." As 6 o'clock approached, Eleanor's aunt departed as planned, her leaving calculated to make the shop appear more vulnerable and inviting as a target. Jonathan positioned himself in Eleanor's office, a small room off the main shop with a view through a partially open door. William took up a position behind the counter with Eleanor, ostensibly examining account books, but actually watching the street through the shop's front window. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. 6:15, 6:30, 6:45. With each passing moment, William's tension increased, his hand resting near the revolver concealed beneath his coat. Eleanor maintained her composure admirably, though he could see her breathing quicken as 7 o'clock drew near. At precisely 5 minutes before 7, a hansom cab drew up outside the shop. Two men emerged, and William's breath caught as he recognized the descriptions he'd been given. The first was the silver-haired gentleman Eleanor had described, tall and distinguished, moving with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority. The second was younger, shorter, with dark hair slicked back and the calculating eyes Eleanor had found so unsettling. "That's them," Eleanor whispered, her face pale but resolute. "The silver-haired man purchased the Lilies. The other one threatened me." "Maxwell Sterling and his associate," William confirmed quietly. "Remember, let them speak first. Let them incriminate themselves. I'm right here, and there are officers all around us." The shop door opened with its familiar chime, and the two men entered. Sterling's gaze swept the shop's interior with professional assessment before settling on Eleanor. He smiled, but it was a predator's expression, cold and calculating. "Miss Pemberton," he said, his cultured voice at odds with the menace in his eyes. "How good of you to request this meeting. I believe we have matters to discuss." Eleanor stood straighter, and William was struck by her courage. "Mr. Sterling, I presume, and your companion?" "This is Mr. Robert Chase, my associate. Now, regarding your message, you mentioned certain documentation related to a transaction at your shop. I'm very interested in what you believe you possess." "Before we discuss that," Eleanor said, her voice steady, "perhaps you could explain why Mr. Chase felt it necessary to threaten me. I'm a simple florist, gentlemen. I don't involve myself in whatever business matters you may have." Sterling's expression hardened slightly. "You involved yourself the moment you began asking questions about purchases that were none of your concern. Now, Miss Pemberton, let's not play games. You suggested you have documents. I want to see them. I want to know why Edmund Blackwell died," Eleanor countered, and William felt a surge of admiration for her steel. "I want to know why you purchased those lilies and what that message meant. Remember what was promised. What was promised, Mr. Sterling? And why did keeping that promise require a man's death?" Sterling's face darkened, and Chase moved slightly, his hand disappearing into his coat. William tensed, ready to act, but Sterling raised a hand to stop his associate. "You're making very serious accusations, Miss Pemberton. Accusations that could have severe consequences for you." "Are you threatening me again?" Eleanor asked, her voice rising slightly, carrying clearly to where Jonathan listened in the office, and Thomas and Edward waited in the back room. "Just as Mr. Chase threatened me when he said, 'They're looking for you, and they're closer than you think.' Who's looking for me, Mr. Sterling? Your employer, Victor Hendricks, the man whose criminal enterprises Edmund Blackwell discovered and intended to expose?" Sterling's composure cracked, fury flashing across his features. "You foolish girl, you have no idea what you're meddling with. Hendricks doesn't tolerate loose ends, and you've just made yourself into a very significant liability." "Then it's true," Eleanor pressed, though William could hear the tremor in her voice now. "You killed Edmund Blackwell to protect Hendricks's secrets." "Blackwell was warned," Sterling said coldly. "He was given every opportunity to remain silent and profit from our venture. Instead, he developed a conscience at the most inconvenient time. The tea was quite simple, really. A compound that induces heart failure, untraceable in a routine examination. He died peacefully, still clutching at his principles." "You're admitting to murder," William said, stepping forward and revealing his presence. His revolver was in his hand now, aimed steadily at Sterling. "And you've done so in front of witnesses and police officers." Sterling spun toward him, shock and rage warring on his face. Chase reached for his weapon, but the backroom door burst open, Thomas and Edward emerging with their own firearms drawn. Simultaneously, the shop's front door crashed inward as Detective Sergeant Donnelly and two uniformed officers rushed in from the street. "Don't move," Donnelly commanded, his revolver trained on Chase. "Robert Chase, Maxwell Sterling, you're under arrest for the murder of Edmund Blackwell and for threatening a witness." For a moment, the tableau held, tension thick enough to choke on. Then Chase made his fatal mistake, drawing his pistol in a desperate attempt to fight his way free. The shop erupted in chaos. William lunged forward, pulling Eleanor behind the counter and shielding her with his body as shots rang out. Thomas fired, his bullet striking Chase's shoulder and sending the man's weapon clattering to the floor. Donnelly and his officers converged on Sterling, who raised his hands in surrender, recognizing the futility of resistance. The confrontation was over in seconds, though to William it felt like an eternity. He remained crouched over Eleanor, his heart pounding, until Donnelly called the all clear. Only then did he pull back slightly, his hands framing Eleanor's face as he searched for any sign of injury. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his voice rough with fear and adrenaline. "Eleanor, are you harmed?" "I'm fine," she assured him, though she was trembling now that the danger had passed. "William, I'm all right. You protected me." Around them, the aftermath of the confrontation played out. Chase, wounded and subdued, was being restrained by uniformed officers. Sterling stood in handcuffs, his distinguished appearance marred by fury and defeat. Jonathan emerged from the office, relief evident on his face as he saw Eleanor unharmed. Donnelly approached William and Eleanor, his expression grim but satisfied. That was well done, Hartford. Though I'd prefer if we could arrange these matters with less gunfire in the future. We got everything we needed. Sterling's confession, witnessed by multiple officers, will be more than sufficient to secure convictions for both of them. What about Victor Hendricks? William asked, helping Eleanor to her feet but keeping a protective arm around her waist. Sterling was acting on his orders. Sterling will testify against Hendricks in exchange for a reduced sentence, Donnelly replied. It's already being arranged. Hendricks will be arrested within the hour. His financial records are being seized as we speak. This entire criminal enterprise is coming down, thanks to Miss Pemberton's courage and your detective work. As the prisoners were led away and the shop began to clear of officers, Jonathan approached Eleanor with genuine admiration in his expression. Miss Pemberton, you were remarkable. Your bravery tonight has avenged Edmund's death and likely prevented numerous other crimes Hendricks would have committed. I'm in your debt. I did what needed to be done, Eleanor said simply, though she leaned heavily against William, the toll of the evening finally showing. But I couldn't have done it without Detective Hartford's protection and planning, or without your willingness to trust that plan, William countered, his arm tightening around her. Eleanor, you were extraordinary. Jonathan smiled knowingly, his gaze moving between them. I can see that I'm no longer needed here. Miss Pemberton, detective, I wish you both very well. If you'll excuse me, I have a hotel to return to and investors to reassure that Blackwell's death has been properly resolved. As Jonathan departed and the last of the officers finished their business and left, William and Eleanor found themselves finally alone in the flower shop. The lamps cast a warm glow over the blooms, and the scent of roses and lilies filled the air, no longer sinister but simply beautiful. It's over, Eleanor said wonderingly. It's truly over. It is, William confirmed, turning her gently to face him. You're safe now. Hendricks, Sterling, and Chase will all face justice for what they've done. You can return to your life without fear. My life, Eleanor repeated softly, reaching up to touch his face, which I hope might include a certain detective who promised me proper courtship once this ordeal was concluded. William's heart, which had been racing with fear and adrenaline, now quickened for an entirely different reason. I did make that promise, didn't I? Though I confess, Eleanor, the feelings I have for you have progressed far beyond what would be appropriate for the beginning of a courtship. I find myself already quite hopelessly in love with you. Eleanor's smile was radiant, transforming her face with joy. Then we're well matched, William Hartford, because I fell in love with you somewhere between your first visit to my shop and this moment. Perhaps it was when you looked at me with such fierce protectiveness, or perhaps it was when you kissed my hand this afternoon, or perhaps it was simply the accumulation of every moment we've shared. But I love you, completely and without reservation. William needed no further encouragement. He drew her close and kissed her, gently at first, then with increasing passion as Eleanor responded with equal fervor. It was a kiss that spoke of relief and joy, of danger survived and a future promising happiness. When they finally drew apart, both were breathless, and William rested his forehead against Eleanor's, savoring her nearness. I should do this properly, he said, reluctantly stepping back but keeping her hands in his. Miss Eleanor Pemberton, would you do me the extraordinary honor of allowing me to court you? And if, as I hope and believe, our feelings continue to grow, would you consider someday becoming my wife? Tears of happiness glistened in Eleanor's eyes. Yes, William. Yes to courtship. Yes to someday becoming your wife. Yes to whatever future we can build together. They sealed this understanding with another kiss, tender and full of promise. Outside, the streets of Boston continued their evening rhythms, citizens unaware of the drama that had unfolded in a small flower shop, or the love that had bloomed amidst danger and mystery. In the days that followed, the case concluded with satisfying completeness. Maxwell Sterling, faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of execution, agreed to testify against Victor Hendricks, providing detailed accounts of the criminal enterprises he'd helped orchestrate. Hendricks was arrested, tried, and convicted of conspiracy to commit murder along with numerous financial crimes. Robert Chase received a lengthy prison sentence for his role in Blackwell's death and for threatening Eleanor. Edmund Blackwell's family, informed of the true circumstances of his death, found some comfort in knowing that justice had been served and that Edmund's final act of conscience had ultimately exposed the corruption he'd discovered. Jonathan Ashford, cleared of any connection to the criminal activities, continued his business ventures with renewed appreciation for the importance of thoroughly vetting one's partners. As autumn gave way to winter, William and Eleanor's courtship flourished. True to his word, William courted her properly, with flowers from her own shop, walks through Boston Common when weather permitted, dinners with her family, and countless conversations that revealed the depth of compatibility between them. Eleanor introduced William to her father when he returned from New York, and the older man gave his blessing to their relationship with evident pleasure. On a crisp December evening, as snow began to fall over Boston's streets, William and Eleanor stood together in her flower shop after closing. The space had been transformed for Christmas, with evergreen garlands and red ribbons adorning the walls, and the scent of pine mingling with the flowers. William had been carrying something in his pocket for a week, waiting for the perfect moment. "Eleanor," he said, taking her hands in his, "do you remember the night we met? You were standing behind this very counter, arranging white lilies, and I was a detective following a mysterious summons." "I remember," Eleanor said softly, her eyes shining with love. "I was terrified and trying desperately not to show it. And then you walked in, and somehow I knew that everything would be all right, that you would protect me and help me. You gave me far more than I gave you," William replied. "You gave me your trust, your courage, and your heart. You showed me that life could hold more than just solving cases and pursuing justice. You showed me love, Eleanor, and I want to spend the rest of my days showing you how deeply I cherish that gift." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. Dropping to one knee on the worn wooden floor of the shop where they'd first met, William opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a single perfect diamond. "Eleanor Pemberton, I love you with all that I am. Will you marry me?" Eleanor's answer came through tears of joy. "Yes, William. Yes, with all my heart." As William slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to embrace her, the snow continued falling outside, blanketing Boston in white. They kissed, sealing their engagement, their future stretching before them bright with promise. The flower shop that had been the setting for mystery and danger had become the birthplace of their love story. In the months to come, it would host their wedding, with Eleanor walking down an aisle lined with roses and lilies, toward William waiting at the altar with his heart in his eyes. They would build a life together, William continuing his detective work with Eleanor's support and insight, Eleanor managing her father's shop while raising the children they would be blessed with. But all of that was yet to come. In this moment, on a snowy December evening in 1897, they were simply a detective and a florist who had found each other through extraordinary circumstances and chosen to face whatever came next together. And as any who saw them together could attest, theirs was a love that would endure through all the seasons of their lives, strong and true and perfect in its devotion. The case that had brought them together was closed, justice had been served, and two hearts had found their home in each other. In the end, the white lilies that had marked a murder had also marked the beginning of something far more powerful, a love that would last a lifetime.